Hello, Cardanos, Shelleys, Ouroboroses, Ayos, and other decentralization fellows, warriors. Thank you for joining me on this exploration into a way or ways that can increase our impact in the world. This is very timely in the first place because although I've been waiting for it long, too long, far too long, our time has finally arrived. I'm sure you are more than aware, as I am, of this reality. As our perceptions of the world keeps changing at a rapid pace right now, in the middle of the interdependent crisis that have struck as of 2020, it is clear that the ways of doing things, the very ways in which we are doing things, are being challenged. We call those ways governance. So we start to be thinking now how what we understand by governance becomes a challenge to reason, because it seems like without governance we are doing better. So let's see why in the first place. So governance is known to be, associated mainly with power, with control, with ways of doing things in a manner in which is top-down organized and in which someone is telling us what to do. And so far, that's how it has evolved, because the main reason for governance was to steer action in certain directions, to get agreements, and it has been, of course, as you see, very highly politicized. If you look at the keywords here, which we usually associate with governance, it is clear that authoritarian, seeking stability, risk aversion, those kind of things come to mind. And yet, yes, it seems like, at least now we are living it, it seems like those very concepts are being challenged, because we are living times of incredible change in which risk aversion can also mean, practically paralysis, as you have seen, and in which maybe it is time for us to reconsider what means vulnerability, what means resilience, what means risk, and can we actually govern from other principles? Can we actually govern on foundations of different keywords? For example, what we are witnessing these days is so much social innovation. How the social innovation and social network operating system is being unleashed by those very people from the fringes who really need to step, and they feel that they have to step up to the challenge. For example, social network was deployed by John Cole, a social innovator, during Hurricane Harvey. It is a platform on which people, actually literally lives were being saved, because people could offer their boat or food, or could just go to someone's home who was stuck and give them water. So this platform is now being deployed, which I presented immediately afterwards in Davos. This platform is being now deployed for COVID-19 in various ways and forms. So there are many other examples which we witness, in which emerging leaders, social innovators, all these agents of change are stepping up to the challenge. For example, Chef André, who is also a social innovator, he rescued the restaurant industry by employing people whose workplaces were closed in order to deliver food for the first responders, as well as for, of course, hospital, for the poor, for those who really were in need. And he keeps us being positive during the crisis and during quarantine. Another one is, actually it's the husband of Annie Lennox, the famous singer, who has deployed this AgeWell platform to get the elderly people out of nursing homes The nursing homes during the pandemic have been also dubbed as perfect killing machines. So now having the elderly taken care at home by a network also of elderly who understand their needs and can offer support in various ways and forms has proven also critical. So there are a few features which we can learn from these social innovators and social network operating systems which they are deploying these days. And those features are a bit opposite to what we are used to in our traditional governance system. So that means participatory, very similar attributes to our blockchain deployed networks and communities. So as such, we have now arrived through practice, and we can see in the real world that our time has come and that these decentralized communities, which we are creating now, can actually step up to the challenge and offering platforms that are empowering not only the individuals, but also our communities to take action when it's needed and much faster than otherwise. Because, for example, during Harvey, FEMA was a total failure and people would have died without this social network until their top-down decision-making systems would have been able to move at all. So we have these agile, empowering infrastructures now that it is time for us to deploy. So we can see that a lot of things are happening in the world, not only in our blockchain communities, and crypto communities, but also in the world in general, that show us a shift towards a new mode of production, from person to person to from place to place to person to person. So person-centric, in which linking the right person at the right time for the right task is possible. And of course, many questions are arising. How do we deploy these social network innovating systems? So social network operating systems have been on my mind, as I was mentioning, for a long time, and that is before blockchain existed. I've been working on organic governance, as I call it, and I will explain to you why, with several luminaries, among which Robin Chase, who is the founder of Zipcar, and she wrote a book, Peers Incorporated, while we were working together on this project from Bitcoin to Burning Man and beyond. So we were looking at ways and principles in which we can deploy this social network operating systems. I also worked with Michael Alberts when I attempted and successfully attempting to decentralize the incident command system that is actually animating not only the defense, command and control, but also the joint force operations. And I will show you some examples. So he wrote that book, Power to the Edge, Power to the Fringe. But also, based on those lessons which we had in those times after 9/11, we also learned that giving power to these social innovators has to be done in a way that can follow certain principles. And I call them principles of organic governance, which is also the topic of my talk. So Michael Alberts wrote this book, Participatory Economics, PARECON, in which he underlined such principles for social innovation generation. So the question is, what do we have to do in order to deploy such principles? And can we actually encapsulate them in rules that can create and deploy this distributed autonomous organization to animate communities at the right time, at the right place? So it is a fascinating question, of course, but let's see if it's possible. So what can our current institutions learn from the social innovators which we see today? Of course, one immediate example is how the education system was hit. And of course, with every student at home and in front of their Zoom, just like now, the outreach is so much easier for teachers with various specialties, or their choices as well, to get teachers who are really maybe better than the ones which the school has, and they can reach out and ask them questions. I'm being contacted pretty often for my expertise. So, for example, I will teach a class at Columbia about big data and privacy for students who are interested, and they are high school students who have finished their high school studies, and they are looking for new opportunities and new ways in which they can contribute, and they want to learn more. So all these networks are being now deployed either between teachers who are exchanging information or between students and teachers. So our education system is actually being decentralized right now, and a lot of experimentation is going on. From a stiff education system, which was training students for as cogs for factory or office jobs with a uniform, in a uniform manner, now we have a shift, or we have at least the opportunity of a shift from this stiff education system to an education system which is not producing cogs, but rather individuals ready to participate in the creative economy. So there are, of course, a few ways in which we can do this transition, as you can see in the slide. And a major one is, which profile do we want to manage? Of course, it's much easier to manage a profile which is docile and is not asking me why should I do this and challenging me. But where will that take me? Definitely not to a resilient world, definitely not to a responsive and agile organization able to respond to the complexity of the real world, where we have several crises striking at once. It will not help us ride the wave of complexity in that manner. So it's time to revisit the way in which we are doing things. And on the organizational continuum, culture is structured by the conventions of coordination. I already mentioned that the hierarchies are the most stiff. They're not really very productive and not able to cope with complexity. And then we have, when it's a very complex world, we have totally flexible network, which can respond in various ways, shapes, and forms. But let's see, how are we controlling that network in order to deploy it appropriately to cope with the complexity? And then we have something in between, which we call heterarchy, in which we have a balancing between top-down and bottom-up. That seems to be the most perfect way of doing things, as I will show you very soon. So a hierarchical organization is actually focused on stability, which is guaranteed by this stiff coordination system. And the punishment, yes, what do we punish, what do we reward? And we punish initiative in a hierarchy because the person at the top wants their ways, and their ways should be implemented by those at the bottom. However, it turns out that such an organization, the deeper it goes, so the more complex it is internally, the least it can cope with the external complexity. As such, we have to find other ways to deal with complexity, and we call those response type networks. And as I mentioned, we have the network structure, the immediate flexible network structure, but as well this heterarchy, which can better cope with the complexity of the real world. David Snowden, he has deployed the CYNEFIN framework. CYNEFIN framework actually is an excellent way to map these types of response networks to the types of complexities in the real world. So we have the network being able to respond to complexity. We have this heterarchy able to respond to complicated scenarios in various ways. And of course, the hierarchy only to simple, predictable scenarios, which is not very useful like these days with the crisis. As well as we can have chaotic situation, like, for example, at 9/11, when it just happened, that very moment, it was the chaotic situation. We have to make a decision immediately. So you have to act, first of all, to save yourself, to save the individuals, act immediately, and then analyze and respond. And I've been involved in work around that. So the question would be, how do we contain such evolving complexity? is how do we operate at the edge of chaos? So I worked with the joint forces, as I mentioned, on that, and it was fascinating. We learned a lot, as we know, at the time, and that's what led to also this unraveling and restructuring and reorganization of the incident command system to make it more agile and more responsive. But we learned a lot also, as I was mentioning before, that nature has taught us ways to deal with complexity. And there are many ways, but this is an example in which individuals at the bottom self-organize completely independently without any help in order to optimize a path from their nest to the food source. And what is even more amazing is that they are optimizing this without any help from the outside, but it appears like there is like a plan, someone who shows them, here is the food source and here is the nest, and now let's go and grab the food. So this is called self-organization. This is also called how complex adaptive systems work. And there are two ways. And so they are, self-organized criticality as well as highly optimized tolerances. It turns out that highly optimized tolerances are much more useful, and it's how our cells have been optimizing in order to create immunity in our systems. So we can follow that way in which nature adapted itself to complexity and to respond and to survival now in order to deploy this in our organization. So it is John Doyle from Caltech who actually has posed this theory, which I'm going to, I will immerse you in a bit of network science in the next slides, but just 3 slides, just bear with me so we all understand what I'm talking about here. So what I'm talking about is that individuals from the bottom, they create the rules of the system in a manner which enables them to behave like there is a plan and optimize, just like the ants are optimizing here, as you can see, but without a plan. So we have the rules emerging. So we have these action plans, as I was mentioning, which are practically rules for interaction between individuals, just like the ants were. And we can actually program them in our agent. We can program them through smart contracts in our infrastructure now and deploy the DAOs like that. And we are programming them in our simulation models, as I will show you very soon how we do that. And of course, it is clear that most of the time, especially in social organization, it is necessary to have a goal set from the top, just as I was illustrating here. And then through social interactions, you can achieve those goals. So the setting of the goal would still go top down in social interactions. But then we would have the agents at the bottom, rather than being, puppeteered from the top, we would give them the freedom to self-organize to achieve the goal, just like nature has given them the freedom to self-organize, and it worked much more resilient and much better. We call such structures, which I mentioned as hierarchies, they are also called holarchies, because this is a concept of governance which is actually bringing autonomy and cooperation. So it is balancing the cooperation and achieving a goal which was set from the top with the self-organization of the agents at the bottom to achieve this goal in the most productive manner. And so then a question is, can we actually optimize in our organization to increase the capacity for self-organization? And how do we do it? So Boardman and Saucer actually have written this book, Systems Thinking, in which they show that there are certain attributes like belonging and action-taking and cooperation, which can lead to the emergence of structures around certain goals, and these structures can be deployed on the fly. So just like our decentralized systems work, so we can embed these rules into smart contracts in order to enable the agents to cluster in the most productive way and optimize over a goal. So coming now to the promised or threat of a bit of a network science, your crash course in 3 slides of network science. So networks have functions, as you can see here, which are relating the network topology to properties. So we have all these flows in networks, and the topology, of course, is determined by the flows. So in the context of robustness, for example, so topology and the flows are extremely important because the flows can lead to cascading failures, but on the other side, if we plan for the critical hubs to actually, if we plan the flows for the critical hubs to actually not have that kind of weight and criticality, we can design robust networks. So this balance, topology dynamics, is pretty crucial when we want to control the flows through networks in order to, like, it can be flows of people, like interactions, or flows in case of people interactions that can accelerate or decelerate, for example, the spread of viruses. So we can optimize the networks across all these parameters to control for various things, like, for example, minimize the virus transmission is a way to optimize, or increase the network robustness is another way to optimize. So what I'd like you to remain with is that actually this theory which John Doyle of network robustness, which John Doyle proposed, is following exactly how nature is optimizing for robustness. So it is absolutely an incredible way which is working. So we can adopt it in our organization and deploy those kinds of amazing systems that we can, create, and where, through this process of organic governance, just as you have seen with the ants optimizing for the path to the food and from the food to their workplace, we can have these norms and rules in our institutions emerge from the individual agent interactions. And as I mentioned before, this can be encoded in DAOs. And once we encode them, so it's not encoded once and for all. So if I have a certain goal, I can run a simulation in which, of course, this is a physical world. We have the agents in the digital world modeling the physical world. So we have this digital twin of the world, and then we can run simulation across all these agents and reorganize our structures, our organization. They can be even our stores or offices, so that when we come back to work, we optimize not only for productivity, but we optimize also for health. So let's say through simulations, now if I put the parameter of optimizing over safety and this productivity, then we can have a different restructuring of our physical world, which the software would enable. But these rules would emerge from the individual agent interactions that are revealed via the simulation, as I was mentioning before. So there are certain principles, as I was mentioning before, and I call them, and you can find my paper if you Google my name and emergent engineering, a radical paradigm shift, you can find principles of emergent engineering. So actually these are like architecting without an architect, controlling without a controller, and so on and so forth. And these principles are exactly illustrated here. How we can actually architect our organizations just simply by self-organizing, by enabling our agents in the organizations to self-organize. So as I mentioned, I deployed this across the joint forces, in which, if you remember that emerging crisis that we wanted to contain, so we have this self-organizing security network as the nervous system controlling the crisis. So, and if we allow and enable this power to the edge to create the rules of the game versus the top-down control, we would have response much faster. And in this way, we can also involve this kind of simulation models and quick deployment also during the pandemic now to accelerate the response and the agility of response. for example, by creating a national pandemic collective intelligence system in which the various agents are collaborating and rewriting the rules. And I will show you that the rules need to be rewritten because, for example, police officers, they are the leaders. And if they come and they arrive to the place of the disaster, let's say, or where something strikes or where something happens, if they arrive first, then they are in charge. However, if the firefighters arrive first, they are more team-oriented. So you will see that there can be clashes between various cultures and various organizational cultures, which have been revealed by my work. So we can apply such simulation modelings, for example, to reorganize research labs and the work in hospitals. And of course, also in our manufacturing plants, for example, when Tesla has reorganized to create ventilators, obviously they needed to reorganize very fast. So such simulation modelings are really, really very useful, but also in coming up with a treatment by increasing collaboration and enabling researchers to work together outside restrictions. And there were so many cases, like, for example, when the CDC did forbid the researchers in our best universities in the world, they were forbidden to actually study the coronavirus. And then all this has been rewritten because it was necessary. So, as I mentioned, I worked in several emergency response deployments, and the conclusion was that these organizations, which can be deployed very productively if we follow the natural laws and the principles of organic governance, they also, reveal some vulnerabilities. So, for example, this is a simulation modeling of actually, it was a real life simulation exercise. Thanks God, not a real life situation, but a simulation exercise in which a tanker entered the port just before, let's say, the Olympic Games. It entered the port and it caught fire, and nobody knew if it is actually a terrorist attack or if it is actually just an accident. So, because of the rules of the game in the incident command system, the Coast Guard is the one who's going first to check what's happening, what is with this tanker, and so on and so forth. However, until the Coast Guard went to see what's going on and got back, the explosion was advanced too much for the firefighters to bring in the fire tug. If the Coast Guard would have had the fire tug, then they would have been able to intervene and extinguish the fire. So we revealed through our simulation that actually the policies which we have embedded in our structures in the incident command system are not really the best and not really the most let's say, lucrative or agile in order to respond to these situations. So, of course, the question is, how do we deploy this organic governance? So we have the principles, but do we write them in the rules of the game? How are we going to do this? And I don't know how many of you remember Mitch Kapor with his famous phrase, architecture is politics and politics is architecture. According to him, and we can learn about from Mitch Kapor. He is so current even today, because today we have all these architectures like the centralized structures of Google and Facebook, which are really exploiting our data and personal information. But we also have the blockchain, which is a different way of doing things, in which we can actually give permission to our data and receive something, be incentivized for giving our data. So according to Mitch Kapor, we can actually deploy these social network operating systems as a new type of personnel platforms, like, for example, in the incident command system with all these joint forces. So we can have, from the top down, we can have a paradigm shift in the structures to enable power to the edge from the bottom up to create this. So I was mentioning that even if we enable that, let's say we enable it in one institution, and then that comes across and to work with a hierarchical organization, this is not going to work. So it has to happen in all of them in order to work, to enable them to work collaboratively. Because let's say if the network which empowers the individual, yes, is going to the hierarchy and say, let's do this. Then the hierarchy would ask, well, on whose authorization? In our institution, we need approval to do things. And as such, everything will collapse. So cultural shift may be clashing if we do not have this everywhere in all the organization, at least the ones with which we want to collaborate, and as well the other way around, when the hierarchy comes to the network and asks, okay, well, take me to your leader. And then the network says like, which leader? We don't have a leader. We are all in it together. So our leader belongs to our friend, to us. But one very interesting experiment, which I think I mentioned in the context of my work with Robin Chase on From Bitcoin to Burning Man and Beyond, is Burning Man was a very interesting experiment. So which actually people decided that how the world works today is really ineffective. And we are sick and tired of it. And we just want to get out of the structures and create our new world. So they went to the desert and created their own world. But in the beginning, they were totally wild, wild desert, and no rules, and everybody is totally free, and everybody is free and happy until some things started to happen. And for example, there was alcohol involved, and driving at night, and people got killed, and then a sort of police force emerged from the fringes in order to set up some rules and principles. And it turns out, in my work, as I mentioned, with these simulation models and organic governance, I also came up with principles. So these principles, which I came up with, mirror absolutely perfectly the 10 principles of Burning Man, which emerge from, on one side, the willingness of people to free themselves from the suffocating structures which our world has created to manage us, but as well to create an atmosphere and to create, let's say, a micro society which is safe, respectful of others, and has certain attributes. So principles can emerge, just like the rules have emerged in the ant colony through their interaction, and they could optimize. Principle can emerge. And there are many principles and ways that have been proposed. HOLACRACY is just one of them, and I strongly support those. But they all more or less mirror each other. And this, HOLACRACY governance shows so well that the mix of autonomy and cooperation, as well as this mix of the enabling of self-organization, in which you have various circles responding to various needs, in which you have various ways of doing things that we call constructive organic organization. So we can find frameworks for adaptation in which we have positive and very productive outcomes emerging. So, for example, in the hierarchy, we have the contract and the incentives that, okay, you will be paid if you do as I say. That's what the boss is saying at the top of the hierarchy. But on the other side, it turns out that commitment is a much bigger, and this is also what our blockchain communities have revealed. Commitment versus contract. It turns out that it is a much stronger catalyst for positive action, and as well for action to achieve a mutual goal. So there are ways to do this, and I hope you can see here, for example, as I mentioned, with the circles, but also with various meeting modes in the HOLACRACY. But there are also various types of organizations that have been proposed, like sociocracy, yes, and then HOLACRACY, and this constructive organization. And you have a website here where you can actually go and see a comparison between all these structures. But, they broadly all consist of agile ways for the people at the fringes to self-organize, but also to keep, to keep the commons, let's say the office or the environment in which they work, not exploiting, not exploited. And, it is, I'm sure many of you know that Elinor Ostrom has actually got the Nobel Prize for her principles of governing the usage of common pool resources. So there are ways. So actually what she demonstrated, which is really even more scary, because with the decentralization and blockchain and our communities, we can all say, and of course, I'm such a freedom fighter. So we can all just say, leave me alone. I know what I have to do. Just, let me do my thing. But it turns out that if people are left alone, when they are to optimize this, let's say, usage of a common pool resource like energy or a lake, it turns out that they are more destroying the resource than protecting it, although they have at their heart the best interest for the resource. And therefore, Elinor Ostrom came up with some principles which can guide our behavior in not exploiting, but rather using the common pool resource in a respectful way. And this can be applied to our offices, in which, for example, we can have a positive attitude, like bring coffee and cookies and create a nice atmosphere. And we can also identify if there are free riders who never bring coffee or eat all the cookies, and have a discussion with them and ask them kindly to participate and contribute to the office ambience. Or we can have someone put loud music without using headsets, and we can just invite them. Well, look, you are disturbing all of us. This is a common environment. So the principles are necessary. While the freedom is maybe good, maybe not so good, but definitely not good for a community. So therefore, in communities, it's good to consider such principles, and actually not only in our offices, but as well in our world. Because we have noticed, and we have all seen and lived through this crisis right now with COVID-19, what it means exponential. When you have 5 cases, and next day you have 50 cases, next day you have 500 cases, next day you have 50,000 cases, and you're like, oh, it's too late to do anything else. So a question is, once we sort out this pandemic with the vaccine, until at least the next one strikes, how do we deal with the climate crisis? Because when we will achieve the tipping point with the temperatures on our planet, it will be too late to do anything. And as such, it's time for us to reconsider and really look, how do we want to change the world, and how do we absorb the changes from where we are in this disastrous exploitative situation with Gaia to a positive one. And we have, again, social innovators to learn from, like, for example, in the Black Forest in Germany, the city of Schonau, they have abolished the nuclear power plant energy provider and transformed their community into a completely renewable energy community, in which they are exchanging the energy, and they are also creating these common pool resources. So they have created this HOLACRACY, in which they, through their own power, they have put the solar panels, they have abolished the nuclear power plant, and they are building a better world and a better planet, incentivizing of course, themselves, incentivizing those who are creating the solar power or the transition to this renewable energy, but also so they can not only incentivize through taxes and other systems, but also they are exchanging energy. And in order to see how, for example, the principles of common pool resources would work here, you can envision that actually these people, if they create too much energy for their own consumption, they can put the energy in a common pool and store it. So in that storage, and then everybody can use from the common storage. But, there may be free riders who don't produce any energy, and they consume a lot of energy from the storage. So then there can be rules, again, that can establish the utilization of the common pool resource according to Ostrom principles, and then we can avoid those free riders. So there are many ways to implement those rules. We have them in our book From Bitcoin to Burning Man and Beyond in the chapter written by Jeremy Pitt and Ada Diaconescu. And I invite you to read the book, and especially here just to go into all these details. And to end with, to finish with, just because Charles is also now involved with deploying this new game. Of course, gaming as future workground has been on my mind, and I'm sure on the mind of many of my peers, decentralization warriors. First of all, because gaming infuses us with bliss, with enthusiasm, with passion for work and for all what we are doing, and they are stimulating our creativity, collaboration, working together. So if we deploy the right infrastructure for our games, we definitely can harness enthusiasm from our fellow communities, from our fellows for our community goals. And of course, Jane McGonigal in her PhD work, as well as Castronova in his book, they have underlined which are the productive ways to deploy such gaming operating systems, if you want, it can be used positively in a serious game to incentivize participation and to actually catalyze action, including for the climate problem solving. So thank you so much. It was wonderful to be here and present to you. However, I really look forward to your questions and to have deeper conversations around the topics which I presented. And of course, I will also be very happy to continue one-on-one with you and guide you through the myriad of publications which I have related to the concepts presented. Thank you.